Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I am doing my February wrap-up. As you could have seen from the statistics, this month was not nearly as good as January was. However, I was away for a couple of weekends and that hindered a lot my time that I could spend reading. And also I had kind of like a very slow, not slumpy, but slow reading month, in the sense that unfortunately many of the things I've read were just either okay-ish or not very good. I did DNF, 2 of the books, and I really enjoyed just a few of them. However, they were not precisely 5 stars, and overall, now that the month has wrapped up, I feel like it has lasted ages this month, and it was just okay reading wise. So finger crossed March will be better. However, let's go through things that I have read. As I mentioned in January, I'm going to go from my least liked to my most liked in terms of enjoyment, and I'm going to do the same for the graphic novels. However, I'm going to put them at the end, so for people who are not interested, you can find tabs and jump here and there in the video. Let's start with actually the DNFs, because I had 2 of them. So I'm going to still number them. So in total I would have read, technically tried, attempted 11 things and finished 9 things. So at number 11 we have Alice. This is a retelling of Alice in Wonderland, but it's a very dark retelling, and at the beginning of this book you have Alice. She is in a mental health hospital. She's been there for a while now, and she has this sort of friendship with her next cell neighbor. And one day there is a fire in the mental health hospital and she manages to escape with the neighbor, so the cell neighbor. And yeah, the adventure starts from there. This was a book that I was very much looking forward to. However, I really disliked it. I really truly disliked it. First of all, I think we are thrown into this dark world that's loosely based on Alice in Wonderland. However, we are not given much world building at all. We know that Alice has gone through horrible things, and these, please check out the trigger warnings, because again, sometimes I think some of them can be spoilery, but at the same time a lot of people will benefit from knowing the trigger warnings before going in. So I'm not going to tell you here in case some people consider it spoilers, but I do say look up for the trigger warnings. And we are thrown into these horrible hostile world, and it's just not though fleshed out. It's just mentioned, and I think if you're a very big fan of Alice in Wonderland, you might recognize all the names and all of that. I like Alice in Wonderland, but I'm not the biggest fan. So without having context or without having a fleshed out world and just being thrown in, shitty things happen after shitty things, which I don't necessarily dislike, but it was just a mess for me. We were just jumping and going through places and characters that it was kind of like we already knew who we were. There was basically no world building whatsoever, and I really disliked that. I found the writing simplistic for what topics that it was covering. Some people might appreciate it. To me, it was like, I think it was very light writing for what it's the content, and I just got to a point where I just couldn't care less. I was not interested about what was going to happen next. And I think I read like 150 pages and I was like, no, this is definitely not for me. And I am kind of fearing that Christina Henry is not a kind of author that I might enjoy. I didn't click with the writing. So yeah, I know, that's already with an unpopular opinion. Didn't like this one, didn't care about this one. And at number 10, if you want, the other DNF is the Under the Pendulum Sun. This is a standalone fantasy, fable fantasy, so you got fairies in these. And at the beginning of this book, you got this young woman, and we're talking about like alternative history, Victorian era, where basically there are fairies that live in a separate world from us, like in a distant land. So she travels to those lands because her brother has gone there as a missionary to bring the Lord Words to the fairy and possibly convert them. However, he has disappeared, so she decides to go there and start looking for him. And actually what happens though is that she goes to this mansion and this big kind of castle, and instead of looking actively for the brother, because of the time and the restriction of the time on women, she just stayed in the castle, so all the story takes place there. And it was just heavily religious. There is a lot about the mission of, you know, this kind of priests and religious talks about the Bible, and it was very not my cup of tea. As I mentioned before, I don't like religious books necessarily. I do like when it's like intertwined well in the plot. However, when the plot is exclusively upon that, I can probably name 0 books as of now that I actually liked. And this is basically all based on, you know, humans trying to bring the Lord Words to fairies. And I thought that although it's definitely gothic and I like some of the atmosphere in these and I like the writing, it was so freaking boring and slow for me. And I got to the half point and I was like, you know what, life is short, it's just not for me. Beautiful cover, it can go in a house that will be loved. I just realized that I might have messed up with the numbers because of the DNFs, so I am now gonna adjust myself. On here in the corner you're gonna see the right number of books, and I'm gonna just, as I said, adjust myself and start from book number 8, which are books that I've actually finished, completed. Now, the book that you're about to see, so number 8, is a book that I would not necessarily consider the worst in terms of writing and plot, and you're gonna see in the final video at the end I've done like a bit of journaling video, very short one, that it's not the one I categorize as worst. However, when I was compiling the list and putting them in order, this is a book that I kind of hold my interest a month after I finish it, because I read these at the beginning of the month, less than the worst book. So at number 8, I have actually Northern Lights by Philip Pullman. This is a very famous book and it's part of a trilogy. I think in America, in USA, it's called The Golden Compass, the first book, and there is a movie adaptation and a TV show adaptation of these. And the premise of this is that you got this young girl, she is raised in a kind of convent and with priests around, and in this world there is magic in the sense that people are familiar, so every person has an animal that they're kind of affiliated to, and if one of the two dies, the other dies as well, sort of like that. So you start with this girl brought in a covenant with a very rich famous uncle, and all of a sudden there are people starting snatching up children, and one of the children that end up being snatched is one of her best friend, and the plot starts from her basically trying to go on this mission to find out what happens to these children and get her friend back. Now I'm gonna keep it very vague because it's a very famous book that plenty of you will have read or digested maybe in a movie or TV show format. Now this is well written, so it's nothing to do with the writing and not even the plot per se. I think this is a more middle grade, however it can be quite violent. There are definitely fighting scenes that are quite graphic, if I consider this for middle grade, I mean. So be aware of that, for maybe for older middle grade or very young adult, if it makes sense. And I honestly thought that if I had read these when I was beginning to read fantasy and when I was a child, I would have probably really enjoyed this, if not necessarily loved. However, now it felt just very boring to me. It had an exciting start and then, I don't know, not my thing anymore. Like, it read like I should have read this when I was a kid, if it makes sense. I did really like the polar bear in these and the aspect. However, it's safe to say that I won't be continuing on with the series. I might give the TV show a try, I don't know. I also struggle sometimes when we follow a kid perspective. Not necessarily always, as you're gonna see in a second, but sometimes when our main protagonist is a kid, I don't know, I doesn't hold my interest as others. So this is not the worst necessarily on a quality wise book of the month, but it's the one that a month after I was just like, yeah, meh. I in terms of enjoyment, this didn't stick with me, and I really did enjoy myself and almost left this. At number 7, we had what it could definitely be considered quality-wise the worst book of the month, and this is Bone Crier's Dawn. And this is part of a duology. The first one is Bone Crier's. I don't know, I don't remember the first one, but I did listen to the first one on audiobook and really liked, because this is a fantasy and you follow these two friends in the first one. They are bone criers, kind of not witches, but they are these women, part of these tribe of women that holds some magic through the bones of animals that they kill, that allows them to gain some supernatural power. But also their task is once a month or once a year, I don't remember which one of the two, they have the task of open the gates to let the souls of the dead kind of cross over and either go to what we consider paradise or hell. Then the way their society works is that they have this amoureux, so they are paired up with a human, a man, and they have to produce a child, and then they have a year to kill the amoureux, otherwise they will die too. And in the first one you follow a son of one of his amoureux that knows about them, knows that they killed his father, and now he wants to take revenge. So you've got basically, yes, these three main perspectives, the two friends that are both bone criers and the guy who wants to take revenge on them. Now this is a YA fantasy with a heavy element of romance. However, in the first one, the plot and the myth behind these, which I did know nothing about, hold me interested a lot. I really enjoyed the first book. It was action-packed with a lot of magic in there that was completely new to me. This was honestly a mess. I didn't necessarily dislike it completely. I tasked myself with reading 2 chapters every day for the whole month, because I knew that if I was just to read these, I would probably get in a slump. However, at the end, I was like, I didn't hate these, but it's silly, like it's not well done. On another side, it must be said that the characters in these behave like probably teens put in this situation would, which is completely nonsensical, dumb choices, getting away with it just because they're in a book and not nearly anything that can resemble true life. I don't put together a plan, just go in these life-changing, life-threatening situations and just without any plan, without having a fucking clue what they're doing, and just they get away with it by poor luck. And on my side, this kind of tells me that there was poor planning with these. Like, I thought, like, the author, the plot was not well devised, if it makes sense. They're just thrown in shit after shit, just for the sake of giving us another book. Could have been a standalone, I would have loved it. The writing is okay, but it has a very low rating on Goodreads for a good reason, unfortunately. Like, I didn't hate it just because I think I grew to like these characters from the first one, so I could stand them, but I could totally see that quality-wise, this was a huge mess. And I gave this 2.75 stars, to be very generous. At number 6, we have Only a Monster. This is a Fairy Loot January box, and I've done an unboxing to this, so I'm not gonna go into much showing mode on this video, but this is a YA fantasy, and you have this girl. She travels every summer to spend the summer period at her granny's house with her cousins, and also this summer she is working at this kind of museum as a volunteer, and she meets this cute guy that they like each other, so they are now planning to hang out, have a date. Though she hides a secret that she doesn't even know herself, because her family are actually monsters. This is not a spoiler, it says from, you know, even here. And she never believed them. She always thought they were just a fable of a family, like, you know, a legend of a family, that they were monsters. But when she goes on the first date with this boy, something very weird happens to her, and she has now to come to a realization that actually it is true, her family are monsters and they are good guys or bad guys, depending on the point of view, after them because of their nature. So although I like the premise, first of all, it must be said that they call themselves monsters and they do have supernatural powers. However, they don't resemble whatsoever any kind of monster or monster-like creature that I could ever think of. So I really struggled with seeing them as monsters, and I thought it was not ridiculous, but kind of, yeah, a bit cringy, or like, I like the fact that they were called monsters. That's not the monsters we think of when we think about monsters. There is also kind of not a love triangle, but two guys involved in these, and one of them was supposed to be this other monster, absolutely beautiful. He was so fucking whiny at all times, and was like, are we supposed to want them together or to find him swoon worthy? Because I would slap the shit out of that guy for the majority of the book. Maybe that's the point. Maybe, you know, in other, you know, in the sequels, things will improve, he will improve. But as of now, it was a coward, whiny, I couldn't stand him, basically. I did like the other guy in these, and I did like the ending because of that. I thought that the ending was the best part of this book. However, it was definitely not my kind of book. Again, we had another case where characters do dumb things all the time and get away with it, and they shouldn't have. And although there is a sequel for sure, I'm debating if I will ever pick it up or not. It wasn't a win for me. I gave it between 3 stars and 2.75 stars, to be generous, because the writing was okay. I didn't mind that at all, but it was just kind of a YA story that I kind of feel it's YA. The premise is cool. I just don't think this should be called monster. So just, yeah, I think it kind of misleading in that, giving you, oh, we are following a monster perspective. I thought that was misleading. Apologies, I'm a bit breathless because I had ordered some specific pot mix for my blends, and they delivered it to my neighbor and I had to pick it up, and it was massive and I'm tiny, so I had to literally drag it home. Wasn't fun for me, must be very fun for my neighbor looking at me dragging the massive box around. Anyway, at number 5 we have Memoirs of a Geisha. This is a historical fiction, and as the title suggests, you follow a geisha from basically when she's very little to the point where she moves to the city due to a series of events, and then she becomes a geisha. And you follow her until, like, not old age, but like middle age. And let me breathe.
Eventually.
And so this, I loved the first 120 pages. It was extremely interesting up to the point where she becomes a geisha. And then it was just basically nothing happens after she becomes a geisha. And it was rather uneventful. The writing is very beautiful. I did end up overall enjoying this because of the writing. However, now that I am sitting back, I'm not immersed in the story anymore, I have to say, first 120 pages when she's a kid, up to a point where she's an apprentice and then becomes a geisha, super cool, interesting. Then rather dull plot-wise. I also found our main protagonist rather dull. Like, she had such like a potential, she had such a personality when she was growing up, and then she becomes a geisha and there is an antagonist in this, and I found that the way she behaved when she became a geisha was not very dissimilar to how the antagonist had treated her, in terms of taking advantages of others and just being a spoiled brat, basically. And the only thing that really distinguished her from other geishas were the fact that she had blue-grey eyes. And again, you can see that this is written by a white man. I mean, she could have been an amazing geisha without having like Western eyes, if it makes sense. Like, I thought, was it necessary? Because she doesn't distinguish herself because of the way she dances, or because she does anything particularly innovative in a geisha sense. Like, there is nothing distinguishing her apart from the color of her eyes. But there is like her personality, the way she behaves as a geisha. There's nothing to distinguish her, and she's considered at one point, and I don't want to spoil anything, but she's there is a book technically written about her, so she's considered kind of famous. So I didn't found our main protagonist particularly appealing when she becomes an adult, basically, and I kind of found her like, I didn't really like her, basically. I also didn't like very much their relationship in this, and the only thing that she is obsessed about is this bloody chairman, which is this man that she meets when she's a child. So she's like 9 years old and he's already 35. And throughout the story, that's our main love interest, like that's her obsession. And I had at one point to sit back and just say, we are talking about a grown, a middle-aged man, and we are supposed to see him as this, not swoon-worthy, but as the love interest. Like she is, even when she grows up and she's 18, at that point he's almost 45, 50, 55. And that I thought the age gap, I was just a bit, well, just put me off a bit. I didn't see again any particularly appeal in him. He's not very much present overall. So her obsession with him is not justified by his action. Like, yes, he does something kind, but then throughout the book, he's not this remarkable man that does things that need praise or that would justify her the strong sentiment she has for him. So I couldn't see that, and I didn't like, the way this ends, the way this goes. I thought it was rather unremarkable. And on the other side, I think it goes on the same line as last month when I read the Thousand Autumns of Jacob de Zoet, in the terms that it's a historical fiction in a sense, in certain aspects, true to life, where there is no much exciting things happen. It's just like, you follow a life of someone who's lived and done things that some were a bit peculiar, but overall quite average for the context of her being a geisha and so on. So there is no explosive action or much happen overall. It just kind of a slice of life, but overall life, if it makes sense. So in that could be considered a bit realistic. I also thought that overall I would not have loved these as much as I did, in the sense that I would not have found intriguing exploring the geisha world and how this culture works if I was already familiar with it. So I think this is a book that works either because you appreciate the writing a lot, which is very beautiful writing in my opinion, or you appreciate what he's showing you. He's showing you a culture that it's so new to you that it keeps you gripped to the pages, just learning how, a geisha hair works or how her dress works, not necessarily because of the plot or our main protagonists, which is my case. So I appreciated the context, but I would not have loved this if I was so familiar already with Japanese culture and geisha culture. Probably I would just have seen the dullness of it all. And overall I ended up giving this 4 stars, but there are a lot of elements I didn't like. Would I suggest this? I would suggest this for the writing if you're not familiar with the culture, not necessarily for the plot itself. And especially don't go into these if you're very particularly triggered about having like a very big age gap between your main character and the love interest in these. Let's call it love interest or whether. But yeah, overall, I will check out the movie, and because I've watched the movie ages ago and I want to know how now I compare them. And number 4, we have Black Girls Must Die Exhausted. I listened to these on script. I would categorize this like contemporary fiction. It's very much a slice of life. The life of this black woman. She is a TV presenter and she is about to get promotions. However, she receives some sad news. You basically follow her through a bunch of weeks of her life where she tried to sort out her health, her career, also her love life, and also you follow her in her relationships with her father, with her grandmother, and with her 2 best friends. This is very, very much out of my comfort zone. I don't read contemporary fiction of this genre. However, I had heard people speaking about this and I was curious and I found this on script. Now this is very out of my comfort zone. I don't read or listen to contemporary fiction. It's just a genre that really does not do it for me at the moment. So although I do like family sagas, I don't tend to like slice of life contemporary or literature fiction in that sense. So it took me ages to listen to these. However, I had heard amazing things about these and I wanted to check it out. I found it on script and I said, I like to go out of my comfort zone sometimes. And I did really enjoy this overall. Although it took me like 2 months to go through like a 10 hours audiobook, which is a bit unusual for me. I still ended up overall really appreciating the topics, the discussions that were brought in these. I grew attached to the characters, I shed even a tear or two, and if you like the genre, I would definitely say give it a try. If you are a bit on the fence and you want to try a slice of life contemporary fiction, this would be a good start, because not only you have characters that are explored, I think, in a good amount of depth, in my opinion, but also you have the important contemporary topics that are very relevant nowadays, that are brought forward. Discussion around this I really appreciated. I think there is also a sequel to this, and I might check it out because it ends on a cliffhanger a tiny bit, so I do want to eventually check it out. It's something that I will take my time with, because it is, again, it's not something that I actively enjoy reading or often, but I will definitely one day probably get around to it. I want to say though about these, only not critique, but something that I would like to be expanded upon, is that there is at one point something happens. So there is a shooting of a policeman, and that shoots like a black young man, and there is a lot of discussion about how this young man was just, you know, not doing anything wrong, and he was just a very eager student, and he was just getting to medicine school, and that how unfair his shooting was, which is 100% true. I just would have appreciated if the discussion would have expanded to the fact that even if, you know, a young black kid, even if he's breaking into a house, is not a justification for police to shoot them. I mean, the only time I can see that justification for, you know, a policeman shooting at a suspect is if the other suspect is shooting at the police, or literally threatening to shoot the police actively. Which is not necessarily a critique of the book. I just wish there was a bit of more talk about shooting a suspect, even a suspect that was breaking and entering a house but was not armed or shooting back at you. It would still be wrong, even if this kid was up to no good and not going to medical school, if it makes sense. It's about the discrepancies between the use of force or what force is needed. Even in a case where someone is breaking the law, you still have to use relevant force, but not like force that's not justified, if it makes sense. So shooting a kid who's not armed is always going to be a no-no, if it makes sense. Since these topics were very relevant, I thought it would have been a nice addition to also mention this, if it makes sense. But yeah, overall I gave this 4 stars. Then number 3, we have The Midnight Lie, which is a big surprise. If you've seen my TBR from February, I had attempted, best said, the other trilogy by Rutowski, which I guess is called the Winner trilogy, something of the sort, and I never continued on after the first book. It might be that if I was to read it now, I would appreciate it more, I don't know. However, so I was a bit hesitant in reaching out for these. The only reason why I actually did is because I have the second book in the series, because I got my favorite special edition. I loved the cover, the design, and I wanted it, so I bought it, and I didn't realize it was the second book in a duology, which it takes place in the same world as the Winner trilogy, but it's a separate story. However, I guess you have like mentioned at least the characters from the first trilogy, and the premise of this is that you got this young girl. She is living in the poor side of a city, and this city is divided by walls. So again, you got the poor people who do not have access to behind the wall, and where the rich people live. I would consider these are like low fantasy / dystopian fantasy, 100%. The plot starts when basically a bird of the rich people gets lost, and our protagonist sees the birds and tries to get the bird. And I don't want to say anything else. What I really enjoyed about these is the romance. So there is an element of romance in these. I think it's a 50-50 in terms of how much the romance and the plot is. It's well balanced in the sense that if you like fantasy books with romance in it, this is for you. If you like only romance, there is definitely a plot element. And if you dislike romance, there is romance, so just be aware of that. And it's a sapphic romance, and I absolutely loved it. I thought the tension between the characters, the slow burning romance that we have in these, I mean, I was definitely sold on that. I really enjoyed both characters, and I am pleased with the ending to a point that I will definitely continue on. I was planning to continue on anyway because I own the book, but now I'm kind of happy to have to continue on, if it makes sense. Dystopian is not my cup of tea again. It's something that I rarely enjoy. However, it was okay, the plot. I thought the pace of these, and combined with the writing, which I did like, and these background romance, this burning, this, you know, swoon-worthy girl, which is the main love interest, just made a perfect combination. I ended up giving it 3.75 stars. It is a YA. Considering how much I had not liked the first book in the Winner trilogy, I was very pleasantly surprised with these, and it's a very high 3.75 stars. Like, again, because the plot, the dystopian side of it, it's not my cup of tea, but I really enjoyed the ending and everything rest. It's just, don't see it as a negative. 3.75 stars is actually very high compared to my expectation when I first opened the first page of this book. Also, can we appreciate this? This is absolutely stunning. Then at number 2 we have A Natural History of Dragons, a memoir by Lady Trent. This is a fantasy, alternative history fantasy also, if you want. It's a 5-book series, if I'm not mistaken, and you follow the memoirs of Lady Trent, who becomes a dragon naturalist, and she's a kind of an expert when it comes down to dragons' autonomy. And you start from here, where she was just a noble-born kid, and how she becomes passionate about dragons, and I think you follow her up to the point where she's like around 22 years old in these, or something of the sort. The main focus was when between she's 18 to 22, 21. And I've been told that this is, for some people, they found it very slow, and I was expecting actually to, I don't love the cover so much, to end up being bored. I wasn't bored at all while reading these. The writing is something that really kept me on the page, but also the writing combined with a very witty and, for the time, remarkable young woman who just knows what she wants, and she just goes to extreme lengths to obtain it, but doing it very tastefully and very cleverly. So I really enjoyed our main protagonist. In her good and bad side, what I did appreciate is that we have our main protagonist who has flaws, if you want, and she's not afraid of being both, of, you know, accepting both sides of herself. So that I really enjoyed. Like, she makes mistakes and she tells you that was a mistake, and that's okay. I really appreciated that. I also found very interesting this kind of fantasy where it's, yes, it is a slow story and there is a lot of traveling, which is usually something I do not like in fantasy or books in general. I get bored with traveling. However, I think I could overcome that because of all the rest. I was fascinated by the dragons. The dragons are not every page there. She doesn't meet 1,000 dragons. It's not action packed. However, there was more action than what I was expecting. There's a lot of adventure that happened. It's kind of like an Indiana Jones, a mild Indiana Jones with a female protagonist and with dragons as kind of main thread of the story. We'll definitely continue on with these, and I gave it 4 stars. And at number 1, probably with no surprise you've seen my TBR, it's Assassin's Apprentice. This is start of a huge series by Robin Hobb, made of sub-series or like, yeah, companion series if you want. And I wanted to start in chronological order, so I started with this. In this you follow Fitz when he is a child. He is the bastard son of the prince, and that prince chivalry, he is due to become king. However, because of the shame of him having a bastard, he decides to resign. He decides that he just gonna go away and not become the next king. So his 2 brothers now are next in line, and Fitz, because of a tiny bit of this, but also because chivalry was very much loved, is kind of raising the stable away from royalty and is very much frowned upon. And I don't want to say anything else, because I think, first of all, I was told that this was the weakest one in the series, and I absolutely loved this. However, it is a slow fantasy without sacrificing the plot and twists and turns, because you do have them, and I think you have them in a good amount, but it's a very dense read. However, I love the writing. I loved our main characters. I think it's a character-driven fantasy that allows us so much time to explore and enjoy and grow with our main character. I would categorize this as a high fantasy, coming-of-age fantasy. The title, it suggests that, you know, Fitz gets involved in different things throughout his young life at the moment. And I know that in the next couple of books in this trilogy, you will follow him throughout his life. But I cannot pinpoint anything that I disliked about this book. The only thing I wished it was more subtle maybe was who the bad guy and the good guy was. It's a very clear demarcation between bad and good, if it makes sense. So it wasn't surprising for me when plot twist happened and, you know, oh, it's the bad guy who did it. Well, of course, because we knew from the beginning. So there was no blurred lines there, which is something that I tend to like in my fantasy. This was also written in 1995, I believe, and for the time, and it's remarkable. Like, I get the hype now. I will continue on. This was a 4.75 stars, and I'm sold. Like, I can see the hype. It was good. It was brilliant. And if that's the weakest, I'm excited to see what's coming. Okay, so graphic novels and manga. Number 3, we have Lady Mechanica, volume number 5. I'm not gonna try and pronounce this because I did try, I think, in the TBR, and when I heard myself pronouncing that, I was like, whoa, I should have sharp. So I'm gonna sharp. I'm gonna let you appreciate the art because the art is one of my favorite. It's just stunning. This is a steampunk fantasy graphic novel series where you follow Lady Mechanica, who has woken up one day as cyborg, so parts of her body are mechanical, and you follow throughout the volumes her solving crimes and also trying to figure out what happened to her because she has no recollection of how she ended up losing limbs and what happened to her. I do like the plots, like in these, like the subplot we have of the mystery that's been solved. I really enjoyed it. It was nice, but I do stick around because of the art, mostly of the art. This is in third place, but not because I didn't like it or anything. I gave this full 4 stars. Really enjoyed it. Will acquire the next volume. I think, but I could see there were only 6 volumes out, so I need to find out what happened, you know, if it's concluding volume or whether. I know there are a couple of spin-offs which I'll get my hands on. It's overall a series I always enjoy reading, but the plot is one that you read it, you enjoy it, you close it, and it's done, if it makes sense. It doesn't stick with me, the plot itself, but I do remember this series because of the art style. This was the month for being wrong, I guess, in my TBR, because at number 2 we have This One Summer. This is a contemporary graphic novel that I had purchased I think a charity shop years ago, and then I realized that I don't really like contemporary stories, so I was like, either I read this and get rid of it, or I get rid of it without reading it. But this one intrigued me, and I heard a couple of people speaking about this highly, so I wanted to check it out for myself, and I did, and I'm very glad I did. This is a very contemporary slice of life story again, and you follow this girl. She always goes to her summer lake house where she has a friend also there that she hangs out with throughout the summer, but this summer things are a bit different because her parents are having some marital problems, so there's a lot of fighting in her house, and also she's growing up and she's starting to become kind of looking around, and there is a boy in the town that she might like. And yes, I show you the art. I think this is a very quiet and yet beautifully illustrated graphic novel that touches upon a very heartbreaking and yet very relevant topic. And I don't want to spoil anything because I think it's part of the appeal of going to this is not knowing exactly what is the background issue that's going on, and it's a threat that's present in her family but also in the town. So there is a melancholic thread, and yeah, it's very relevant and unfortunately something that many people go through. So I really liked how tastefully this was done. I really love the art style. This is all done in blue and white color palette, but some of the pages, some of the way she illustrates these, it's very innovative, something I've not seen before, like the perspective she takes when she draws something. I really appreciated that. I gave this 3.75 stars, which is again very high considering that I was expecting to really dislike this. The end was the only thing that was a bit disappointing because this is a standalone. I was expecting to have some more. It's a very much open ending without much closure, but at the same time someone could see this as very realistic because in life you don't always get closure or things don't always come together neatly. And yeah, I will check out more by this author for sure. I will keep this. Definitely keeping this. Really enjoyed this overall. and it's just very nostalgic for someone who used to, for a few years, go to the lake house with their cousins, as I did. This brought up a lot of nostalgic feelings, a lot of memories, and that's maybe also why I really like these. And at number 1 we have, again no surprise, ouch, that's very heavy on my face, Berserk, the deluxe edition, which contained the manga volume from 1 to 3. I had already read the first volume in the this very lengthy saga, but I reread it because it's been like 2 years since I read it, and I wanted to start it again and then continue on. So this is Berserk, which is the story of Gus, who, it's a bit complicated to explain. Basically, he's on a path of revenge after something happened to him, and he's marked, and now he has to travel throughout this very dark, grim, dark world and kind of fighting these demons. He's not doing though to help humanity necessarily, but he's got an agenda of his own, and again, he wants revenge. Now, Berserk is a very famous series if you are familiar with manga, or I think even anime. There's definitely an anime of this. It has inspired video games like Dark Souls that I know of, and movies and so forth. It's a relatively oldish series, so it's, you know, I'm not gonna go into much details about the plot, because if you know manga you should know this, and if you don't know, I think it's one that it's very difficult to explain, and you should experience for yourself to fully grasp and understand what this is about. I really enjoyed these. It's not to a point of loving it, but I think it might become one that I end up loving, if it makes sense. This is a grim, dark fantasy. It's absolutely brutal. It's featured in a video I've done a few years ago where I was reading the most bizarre manga ever written. So it's featured in there, and that's how I came about to know about these. I'll show you some of the art that's not like I can, because this is so violent. There is not much I can show you, if it makes sense. There is also sexual content in this, so just be aware of that. I think the reason why it's also not a 5 stars, because although I like an anti-hero, Gus in this is absolutely our main protagonist. I couldn't, like, I really disliked him as a person, like as a human being, which is something that I think toward the end I could see like a ray of sunshine for us, so I could come to love him and love his journey. And I think that's also why this manga is so great, because, you know, your anti-hero is truly an anti-hero. It doesn't sugarcoat things. At the beginning he's just thirsty for blood, and his brutality, it kind of got to me at a point, and yeah, it's what fascinates me. Like, I do love the idea of Gus, like I do love him as a character, but I don't like Gus. And to a point that it was so cold that sometimes I was like, oh, I want to strangle you. So I think though that's something, the potential is there, the potential for me to end up absolutely falling in love with Gus and the series and everything that's Berserk, if it makes sense. Gruesomeness on point if you're looking for blood and for extremely violent action, which I really don't mind, and especially in this format as a manga I really enjoy. Yes. I gave this 4.5 stars. Thank you guys, that was it for this month. Let me know in the comments down below which was your favorite book of the month. I'd love to know and maybe get some good recommendations, and I'll see you next time. Take care of yourself. Ciao.